A woman returns after weeks of absence without explanation. This record documents the man's measured responses, communication patterns, and strategies for maintaining boundaries, dignity, and emotional independence. 3 weeks had elapsed without any form of communication from the woman. Prior to her disappearance, records indicate multiple interactions between the two parties, including text exchanges, phone calls, and 2 in-person meetings. These interactions were characterized by consistent engagement and timely responses from both sides. On the morning of her return, a single message was received, a brief casual inquiry regarding the man's well-being. There was no acknowledgement of the 3-week absence, no explanation provided, and no request for clarification regarding the lapse in communication. The man observed the message and noted the immediate contrast between prior consistent engagement and the current casual tone. He recorded the timing of the message, noting that it arrived precisely 21 days after the last contact. There were no preceding indicators suggesting an impending communication. The context of the previous interactions demonstrated that both parties had established a pattern of mutual attention, which makes the absence and subsequent casual return significant in evaluating future dynamics. During this interval, the man maintained routine activities, including work and social engagements, without initiating contact. Observations indicate that he did not engage in repeated inquiries or messaging, maintaining a consistent, non-reactive pattern. The return message was acknowledged internally, with careful attention paid to the absence of apology, explanation, or recognition of the time elapsed. The implications of this return were recorded as follows. The woman's casual approach provides insight into her treatment of prior interactions and her expectations regarding engagement. The absence of acknowledgement suggests a test of availability and response priorities. It also establishes a baseline for evaluating the man's adherence to personal boundaries and standards of engagement. The situation presents a critical opportunity for the man to observe and document behavioral patterns without immediate emotional response or interpretive commentary. This record establishes that her reappearance, while superficially neutral, functions as a defining moment in the ongoing interaction. The man's response at this juncture will set precedents for subsequent communications, demonstrating either maintenance of prior standards or deviation into reactive patterns. Understanding this event as a documented occurrence rather than a subjective experience provides the framework for further assessment in the subsequent phase of observation and interaction. Following the 3-week period of non-communication, records indicate that the woman initiated contact with a single brief message. The message consisted of a neutral greeting and a query regarding the man's current activities. There was no mention of the previous absence or acknowledgement of the time elapsed. Communication was conducted via the same messaging platform used prior to the disappearance, maintaining consistency in the medium. Documented observations indicate that her pattern of re-engagement aligns with prior intervals of intermittent contact. Historical data shows similar instances in which she withdrew temporarily and returned with minimal explanation. The timing and brevity of her current message were recorded, noting that it arrived at 10:23 a.m., precisely 21 days after the last recorded interaction. This recurrence of pattern establishes a precedent for evaluating the reliability and consistency of future communication. The man's response was withheld during the initial period following the receipt of the message. Observation of his non-reactive behavior provided a controlled environment to record subsequent interactions objectively. The woman's message, by design or circumstance, prompted no immediate alteration in her engagement style. The absence of apology, explanation, or recognition of prior communications establishes a factual baseline for assessing relational conduct. Analysis of the documented interaction reveals that the casual approach functions as an observable test of access to attention and engagement. No assumptions are made regarding emotional state or intent. The recorded behavior demonstrates that she monitored the availability and timing of responses without altering the established sequence of prior patterns. Her return represents a continuation of documented interaction habits, rather than a deviation indicative of behavioral change. This event provides a reference point for subsequent evaluations of engagement protocols. The absence of explanatory content and the neutral tone of her communication establish parameters for monitoring adherence to previously recorded interaction standards. The man's observation of these patterns creates a factual record to assess consistency, predictability, and adherence to previously established engagement norms. Following the receipt of her casual message, the man initiated a documented period of observation. Within the first 12 hours, he reviewed the content and timing of the message but did not engage immediately. Historical interaction data indicates that previous responses to her communication had been prompt, averaging 15 to 30 minutes per reply. The deviation from prior response times establishes a factual baseline for comparing behavioral changes. During this interval, he monitored subsequent messages from the woman. At 14:42, she sent a follow-up inquiry regarding his recent activities. This message maintained the neutral tone of the initial communication without acknowledgement of the prior absence. The man's engagement, when eventually initiated, consisted of a brief acknowledgement sent at 18:05, 3 hours and 23 minutes after the follow-up message. No extended dialogue or expressive commentary was included. Records indicate that the man's initial internal focus was on the temporal gap of her absence and the pattern of intermittent messaging. Observed tendencies include consideration of prior interactions and anticipation of her motivations. Documentation notes that this anticipatory focus did not result in any immediate change to engagement protocol. No assumptions regarding intent or emotion were recorded. The observations were limited to measurable behaviors, including message timestamps, response delays, and content length. Subsequent interactions over the next 24 hours followed a pattern of minimal engagement. The man responded to factual inquiries with concise statements, without elaboration or solicitation of personal explanations. The woman's messages maintained a consistent, neutral tone, repeating the pattern of brief and casual engagement. The recorded outcomes demonstrate a sequence in which delayed or measured responses influenced the structure and frequency of subsequent interactions. This sequence highlights an observable dynamic. Rapid or eager engagement has been historically associated with longer, more detailed messaging from her side, whereas measured responses resulted in minimal follow-ups. The documentation supports the conclusion that the man's timing and manner of engagement function as controlling variables in the ongoing interaction. All records were maintained in chronological order, providing a comprehensive account of interactions and patterns without interpretation of subjective emotional states. Upon receiving the woman's casual re-engagement message, the man recorded the exact timestamp, 09:17 a.m. No immediate response was issued. The communication platform remained consistent with previous exchanges, primarily text-based. A measured delay in engagement was implemented, documented at intervals of several hours before any acknowledgement. The initial delay spanned 4 hours, followed by a subsequent delay of 6 hours for the next message she sent at 14:21. During this period, all incoming messages were logged with timestamps and content notes. The woman's messages maintained brevity and neutral tone, with no acknowledgement of prior absence or inquiry into the man's temporal gaps in response. Her messaging pattern displayed intermittent engagement, sending a total of 3 messages over a 12-hour period. Each message was responded to sequentially with a measured delay, maintaining consistent intervals between receipt and acknowledgement. The man's responses were limited to concise, factual statements addressing only the content of her messages. No additional commentary or inquiries were included. Response times were systematically recorded, demonstrating a consistent pattern of delayed acknowledgement relative to the receipt of messages. The sequence of interactions indicated that the delayed response protocol established control over the timing and structure of engagement. Observable outcomes of this delayed response strategy included a reduction in message frequency from the woman and an absence of escalation in urgency or emotional content. All communications remained factual and neutral, adhering strictly to established timing patterns. The recorded sequence illustrates a methodical approach to maintaining consistency in interaction while observing the woman's behavioral response to controlled timing. The archival documentation emphasizes that the man's measured responses, with precise timing and limited content, provide a record of behavioral influence without subjective interpretation. Each delayed response functions as a documented intervention, establishing boundaries regarding availability and attention. These patterns are maintained for analysis of ongoing interaction dynamics, serving as a factual record for evaluation of future behavior and relational precedent. This account demonstrates that delayed response functions as a structured, observable method of interaction. Timing, content limitation, and systematic documentation serve as the primary variables. The sequence establishes a neutral, factual baseline for subsequent engagement, allowing for continued observation and recording of outcomes without deviation from the archival clinical tone. Following the woman's re-engagement, the man implemented a protocol of casual dismissal. At 10:12 a.m., a brief acknowledgement was issued in response to her initial message received at 09:17 a.m. The response consisted solely of factual statements, addressing the content of her inquiry, with no additional commentary or solicitation of further interaction. All communication occurred via the established messaging platform and maintained a neutral tone. Subsequent messages from the woman were logged at 11:45 a.m. and 15:03 p.m., each consisting of brief, casual inquiries regarding the man's activities and availability. In each instance, the man responded with minimal content, maintaining consistent brevity and factuality. Response intervals ranged from 3 to 5 hours, systematically recorded in chronological order. Observations indicate that her messaging pattern did not increase in frequency or detail following the man's casual responses. She maintained a neutral tone and did not provide acknowledgement of prior absence. No requests for clarification or explanation were documented during this period. The man's consistent, low-investment communication established a factual record of interaction where engagement was contingent upon observable inquiry from the woman rather than proactive pursuit. The archival record further notes that the man did not alter his schedule or behavior to accommodate messaging. All interactions occurred within previously documented routine intervals, and no additional effort or attention was allocated beyond the concise responses provided. The sequence demonstrates that casual dismissal effectively maintained control over the engagement structure, with the man's attention and time preserved as measurable variables. Patterns observed during this period indicate a stable interaction dynamic. The woman's messages remained consistent in length, tone, and frequency. No escalation or deviation from neutral content was recorded. The man's measured approach established clear parameters for engagement, reinforcing the standard of minimal investment without deviation. This documentation provides a factual account of the casual dismissal strategy, including timing of messages, response intervals, content scope, and adherence to neutral tone. The sequence creates a professional record suitable for evaluation of relational dynamics, demonstrating the use of controlled, low-investment responses as a method of maintaining boundary and oversight over interaction outcomes. At 09:17 a.m., the woman sent a brief message. "Hey, how have you been?" No acknowledgement of the prior 3-week absence was included. The man initiated a documented direct confrontation at 11:42 a.m., issuing a single factual message. "I noticed you were absent for 3 weeks without explanation. Can you clarify why?" The message was sent through the same text platform used for all previous communications. A subsequent response from the woman arrived at 12:58 p.m. consisting of, "I've just been busy. Didn't think it was a big deal." Her tone remained neutral and concise. The man did not engage immediately, allowing a recorded interval of 3 hours before responding. At 15:58, he sent a follow-up message. "I maintain connections with people who respect my time. If you want to continue communication, acknowledgement of your absence is required." No additional commentary or emotional language was included. During this sequence, all incoming and outgoing messages were logged with timestamps, content, and medium of transmission. Observations indicate that the woman did not provide an apology or extended explanation beyond her initial brief statement. The interaction demonstrates a documented exchange in which the man clearly established expectations and outlined the consequence of failing to acknowledge prior absence. Following the second message, the woman's recorded behavior included no immediate further contact. A single message arrived the following day at 10:03 a.m. stating, "Understood." No elaboration or additional inquiry was included. The man did not respond immediately, maintaining a neutral interval of 5 hours before issuing acknowledgement limited to "Acknowledgement received. Communication may continue under these conditions." The archival record emphasizes that all statements issued by the man were factual, neutral, and precise. The documented intervals, revals between messages, the content of each message, and the medium of transmission are recorded sequentially for evaluation. No interpretation of emotional state or psychological intent was included. This series of exchanges demonstrates the implementation of direct confrontation as a controlled protocol. All actions, timestamps, and content are preserved as measurable data points. The confrontation establishes a clear standard for acceptable engagement and records the observable behavioral response from the woman, providing a professional and factual account of the interaction without subjective commentary or analysis. At 08:57 a.m., the woman sent a message stating, "Hey, are you around?" No acknowledgement of her prior 3-week absence was included. The man elected not to respond. The interval of inaction was recorded as beginning immediately upon receipt of the message and maintained throughout the documented observation period. During the first 24 hours, all incoming messages from the woman were logged. At 11:23 a.m., she sent a follow-up. "Just checking in." At 16:47 p.m., another message arrived. "Is everything okay?" Each message was documented with timestamp, medium, and content. No responses were issued by the man during this period, and all messages were preserved for sequential analysis. The following day, at 09:12 a.m., a brief inquiry was sent by the woman, "I guess you're busy?" This message was recorded and compared to prior communications, noting the consistency in timing and tone with previous attempts to elicit engagement. No response from the man was recorded, maintaining the silent protocol. All observations during the period of inaction were logged methodically. The woman's messaging pattern showed no escalation in content length or urgency. All messages remained concise and neutral, without acknowledgement of previous absence. The man's inactivity was consistently maintained for a total duration of 48 hours, ending only after the defined observational period concluded for archival documentation. Throughout this interval, no external commentary, emotional interpretation, or subjective evaluation was applied. The sequence of events was preserved in chronological order, including message content, timestamp, and medium. This provides a factual record of the man's choice to withhold engagement entirely, demonstrating the effects of silence as a measurable variable in the interaction. The archival documentation records that the woman's attempts to initiate communication continued within established temporal intervals. All entries reflect the neutral tone of her messages and the complete absence of response. The sequence illustrates the implementation of silence as a controlled strategy, maintaining attention and time as variables under the man's control. This record serves as a methodical account of non-engagement, documenting each interaction attempt, duration of inaction, and resulting communication pattern. No interpretation, moral judgment, or speculation is included, ensuring a clinical and precise record suitable for analysis. At 09:08 a.m., the man initiated engagement following her previous casual return. His first recorded message stated, "I noticed you reached out after several weeks. What prompted your message today?" The message was sent via the established text platform, and the timestamp was logged immediately upon dispatch. At 09:47 a.m., the woman responded, "I've just been thinking about checking in, nothing specific." The content, tone, and medium of the response were recorded without commentary or interpretation. No additional emotive language was present in the message. At 10:15 a.m., the man sent a second inquiry. "When you are unavailable for extended periods, how do you typically communicate your absence?" The phrasing was maintained precisely as documented, and the timestamp was logged. The woman replied at 11:03 a.m. "I usually just don't. I don't feel the need to explain unless it's important." This response was preserved in chronological order with corresponding metadata, including medium and time sent. Following the third question at 11:35 a.m., "Do you acknowledge the impact prolonged absence has on the other party?" Her response arrived at 12:22 p.m. I suppose it can be inconvenient, but I manage my own schedule first. No elaboration beyond the initial statement was recorded. Each response was logged sequentially, noting the absence of apology or compensatory behavior. All exchanges were documented with precise attention to timing, message content, and sequence. No analysis of emotional state or speculative interpretation was applied. The man's inquiries were limited to observable phenomena, focusing exclusively on her behavior, choices, and communication patterns. Observations indicate that each question elicited factual responses with minimal elaboration. The woman did not modify her tone or messaging style despite repeated inquiries. The archival record demonstrates that strategic questioning successfully gathered consistent data regarding her approach to communication, availability, and acknowledgement of prior absence. This documentation provides a complete account of information-gathering interactions, including question phrasing, timestamps, response intervals, and content. All entries remain neutral, factual, and precise. The sequence reflects the man's structured approach to evaluating observable behavioral patterns and establishing a clear record of interaction for future reference without extrapolation, moral judgment, or subjective commentary. Between 09:12 a.m. and 03:45 p.m., the woman engaged in a series of communications following her prior casual return. Each message was logged with timestamp, medium, and content for archival documentation. The first interaction during this period involved her acknowledgement of prior absence. At 09:12 a.m., she sent, "I understand I've been absent. It wasn't intentional." This statement was recorded with exact phrasing and timestamp. No additional elaboration or apology was included. Subsequent inquiry by the man at 10:05 a.m. "Can you clarify how you ensure communication during extended absences?" Elicited a response at 10:48 a.m. "I try to send a brief update if necessary, but I prioritize my own schedule." The phrasing, timing, and content were preserved in the sequential record. At 11:37 a.m., the man asked, "What effort do you typically make to repair any disruption caused by absence?" The woman responded at 12:14 p.m., "I acknowledge it if asked. Otherwise, I continue with normal interactions." No additional commitments or compensatory actions were documented. Throughout this period, her messaging patterns remained consistent, concise, factual, and minimally elaborative. She did not initiate further dialogue beyond the structured questions. All intervals between messages were logged, ranging from 36 minutes to 47 minutes. Observation indicates the woman's responses maintained a neutral and matter-of-fact tone. She acknowledged absence when prompted, but did not provide extensive explanation or active reparative measures. Communication followed previously established norms, with no deviation in medium or timing. The archival record emphasizes observable data points: acknowledgement statements, response latency, sequence of interactions, and method of communication. All entries are preserved without interpretive commentary or inference regarding intent, emotion, or motivation. Patterns of responsiveness and adherence to communication expectations are documented as discrete, measurable variables. This series of interactions provides a factual account for assessing core relational traits, including accountability, respect for the man's time, and consistency of engagement. The record establishes a reference framework for evaluating long-term reliability and suitability for continued interaction. Observed behaviors, message content, and timing collectively form the objective basis for character assessment, without speculative analysis or evaluative judgment. Following prior interactions, the man maintained a consistent pattern of engagement, reflective of outcome-independent behavior. From 08:30 a.m. to 04:15 p.m., all actions and decisions were logged with exact timestamps, medium, and content where applicable. Upon receipt of the woman's message at 08:45 a.m., "Just checking if we're good," the man elected a measured, delayed response. The response, sent at 12:03 p.m., stated, "Acknowledged. We can continue when appropriate." This phrasing was precise, neutral and factual, recorded with timestamp and communication medium. No elaboration or emotive content was included. Throughout the documented period, the man engaged in no additional unsolicited messages. When the woman sent follow-ups at 01:27 p.m. and 03:05 p.m. Both were logged with exact content. "Are you sure you're okay?" and "Do you want to talk later?" No responses were issued outside the scheduled engagement plan. Each non-response interval was recorded in hours and minutes, maintaining a complete chronological record. Observations indicate the man's behavioral consistency. Decisions regarding communication timing, phrasing, and selective engagement were applied uniformly, independent of the woman's attempts to elicit immediate attention. All actions were executed without deviation, reflecting adherence to pre-established standards for interaction. The archival record documents additional activities conducted concurrently by the man, including scheduled work tasks and personal routines. These entries serve to illustrate that engagement with the woman did not alter primary scheduling or priorities. No reactive behaviors were recorded. All interactions were planned and executed according to objective criteria. No analysis of emotional state, speculation regarding motivation, or psychological interpretation is included. All entries remain factual, detailing observed behaviors, timing of actions, and the content of communication. Patterns of delayed response, measured engagement, and prioritization of personal time are systematically recorded. This sequence establishes a methodical account of outcome-independent behavior. The man's actions demonstrate maintenance of dignity, consistent standards, and preservation of time and energy. Documentation reflects objective adherence to principles of self-sufficiency, measured engagement, and controlled access to attention, providing a clear record suitable for evaluation of conduct under circumstances of casual return and boundary testing. These documented strategies provide a guide for enforcing standards and preserving self-respect. Subscribe to Attraction Matrixx, like the video, and share to learn more about handling casual returns with control and clarity.